Thank you, Madam Chair. We have talked for several hours now about the question of targeted killings of Americans, and you've heard it from a number of senators. And I'd like to get your reaction on one point in particular, and that is this question, particularly in the context that you've given, that you've tried to focus in areas where the evidence is substantial, the threat is imminent, where there is a particularly persuasive case that the targeted killing of an American is warranted. In that kind of case, do you believe that the President should provide an individual American with the opportunity to surrender before killing them?
So I haven't spoken about any specific operation that involved the killing.
I'm talking about the concept,
right?
Because you talked about the concept.
Right.
You said
absolutely
imminent threats, serious evidence, grave concern, and certainly words that strike a chord with me. And that's why I'd be interested in your thoughts on whether in those kind of instances the President ought to give, should give, an individual American the opportunity to surrender.
Right. I think in those instances, and right now, let's use the example of al-Qaeda, because if an American were to join al-Qaeda, we have routinely said, openly, publicly, repeatedly, that we're at war with al-Qaeda. We repeatedly have said that al-Qaeda is, in fact, trying to kill Americans, and that we are going to do everything possible to protect the lives of American citizens from these murderous attacks from al-Qaeda. We have signaled this worldwide. We repeatedly have said it openly and publicly. Any American who joins al-Qaeda will know full well that they have joined an organization that is at war with the United States and that has killed thousands upon thousands of individuals, many, many of them who are Americans. So I think any American who did that should know well that they, in fact, are part of an enemy against us, and that the United States will do everything possible to destroy that enemy to save American lives.
And I certainly, and I said this at the very beginning, I certainly want to be part of that effort to fight al-Qaeda on all of these key fronts. I just want to have some answers, and I'll give you another chance, whether you think the President should give an individual American the opportunity to surrender. I think that Senator King, for example, talked about the idea of a new court, and there are going to be colleagues that are going to talk about a whole host of ideas, and I commend you for saying that you're open to hearing about that. This is something that can be set in motion, I think, in a straightforward way as a general principle. We're not talking about any one individual, and I think you've answered the question, and I won't go any further unless you want to add anything to it. The only other point I'd say is we've covered a lot of ground today, and as far as I'm concerned, we've got a lot of ground still to cover. I've made it clear that we've got to see any and all of those legal opinions, the ones that the bipartisan group of senators asked for, before the vote. And to your credit, you said you'd take the message back to the White House. Because what it really goes to, Mr. Brennan, is this question of checks and balances. And we probably didn't use that word enough this afternoon, because I think that's really what this is all about. Our Constitution, fortunately, gives the President significant power to protect our country in dangerous times. But it is not unfettered power. It's power that is balanced through this special system that ensures congressional oversight and public oversight. And so that's why these questions that I and others have been trying to get at in terms of congressional oversight, being able to get all of the opinions that are relevant to the legal analysis for targeting Americans, and then to learn more about how you're going to bring the public into the discussions. And certainly you've been patient this afternoon, and I want you to know I think we've covered a lot of ground, but I think we've got a lot to go. And I'll be happy to give you the last word. I got a little more time if you want it.
Thank you, Senator. First of all, any member of al-Qaeda, whether they be a U.S. citizen or non-U.S. citizen, needs to know that they have the ability to surrender, right to surrender, anytime, anywhere throughout the world. and they can do so before that organization is destroyed. We will destroy that organization, and again, out there in al-Qaeda, U.S. citizens and others, they can surrender anytime and turn themselves in.
Just on that point, I don't take a backseat to anybody in terms of fighting al-Qaeda. That was why I came out with it right at the outset. But I asked you a different question, and on the question of what kind of evidence ought to be applied, whether there ought to be geographic limits, the question of whether an individual should be allowed to surrender. For example, there is, I think, also a question whether the obligation changes if, a valid target has not been publicly reported. So there are issues, here, and I think we're going to have to continue those discussions. And Madam Chair, I thank you for this extra round.
Thank you. Senator Coates.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. John, I want to just say, and I'm not going to go into it here, I think maybe better held to further discussion next week in classified room. But this whole idea of leaks, nothing upsets me more in this committee than, and we've had a raft of these in the last couple of years, to see something that was discussed in classified area, written up the next day in the newspapers or on the part of the media, and it drives some of us crazy. It does me anyway. And so maybe I'm a little paranoid about all this and so forth. I just can't totally get my hands around this AQAP situation, which we discussed earlier, but I'm going to defer that until Tuesday so we can discuss it in more detail. Let me just ask you one question here. You said that I don't have the date. The Al-Qaeda core has been decimated in the Fatah, and we're aware of the significant efforts we've made and the progress we've made in that regard. But we see this thing metastasizing now across northern Africa and other parts. What's your, latest assessment of Al-Qaeda in terms of its control and operation of these smaller efforts that are popping up like a whack-a-mole machine in different parts of the Middle East and North Africa?
Well, Senator, you used the exact right term when you said al-Qaeda has been metastasizing in different parts of the world. We have the al-Qaeda core that in the past, I think, exerted quite a bit of orchestration of effort over a number of these franchises that have developed. Now, as a result of the decimation of the core and our ability to interrupt a lot of the interaction and communication between them, a lot of these different elements, like al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, other elements, have grown up and developed as a result of the domestic and local sort of environment. And so they're all sort of, unique into themselves. They have different features and characteristics. We need to make sure that we're able to work with the governments and the intelligence and security services in the area so that we can put as much pressure on them as possible. A number of them have, local agendas. Some of them have local agendas as well as international agendas. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen has a very determined insurgency effort underway inside of Yemen to try to, bring that government down. And the government has done a great job, fighting back. There are other elements, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, they're counter-narcotics, they're narcotic smugglers, they're human traffickers, they get involved quite a bit in kidnapping and ransoms, and also involved in terrorist attacks. So what we need to do is to take into account what the environment is, who we can work with, how we're going to put pressure on them. But any element that is associated with al-Qaeda has, as part of its agenda, death and destruction. And so I fully agree what we need to do is be mindful of this metastasization of the al-Qaeda cancer.
But in relationship to some kind of centralized control over all these things, and having said that the core is decimated.
It really varies. We do see al-Qaeda core trying to exert some control over some of these elements. There's a lot of independence of effort, autonomous efforts that are underway, and be happy to be able to talk in, closed session about the particular relationships that exist between al-Qaeda core and some of these other elements.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator.